Hi, everybody. This is Cindy Maxwell Ostick. I'm co-founder of the Nebraska Legislative Study Group, and I'm so glad to be here today and have Rachel Gibson join us. She's with the League of Women Voters, and we wanted to discuss a little bit about what's been happening at the legislature and, LB574 and this new wrinkle with the amendment that Senator Hansen has brought. So I thought I would just ask Rachel to introduce herself for a moment, and then we can kind of just jump right in.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be here and talk through some of the more technical pieces of what's happening in our legislature on this session. My name is Rachel Gibson. I'm our Vice President of Action for the League of Women Voters of Nebraska. So that's my role, and my job is to pay attention to what's happening in the legislature. So it's from that context that we're going to talk a little bit about what the next steps looks like related to 574, which is the anti-gender affirming care bill, and 626, which was the heartbeat bill, which has been now added as an amendment to the anti-gender affirming care bill, which is just an interesting mix. So we'll talk about what that looks like.
Well, and this was just such a surprise yesterday at the legislature when this amendment was dropped. I know just a week ago, 626, which was Senator Albrecht's heartbeat bill, had failed to make closure. And Senator Repe was present not voting, along with Senator Wayne and the other Democrats, except Senator McDonald. So a lot of people had taken a breath and a little bit of a sigh of relief for this first year of the biennium to think that the abortion ban, was off the table until maybe next January, when of course we know that they would be bringing a new bill. But of course,
it's never over until sine die. That's the rule. It's not over until sine die.
That's for sure. Well, and I am going to pull up anything that you think would be good for us to show on the screen. I'm going to apologize to everybody. I'm not an expert at this program. I'm just doing the best I can, but we thought we'd just share a little bit about this just as a FYI so that we're not all wondering how this would work.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and set kind of the context of where we're at. So LB574 is on final reading. So 3 rounds of debate. We're on the 3rd round of debate, which is final reading. At final reading, you cannot add amendments at that reading. There are workarounds. And so the workaround that's being proposed is to send the bill back to select file, which is round 2, to add a specific amendment and then vote it back to final reading and then vote it forward. That's the big picture of what we're doing here. So they'd be voting to send it back to add a abortion ban, which, to clarify, is not the same bill as 626 was, and it's not the same amendment as what Senator Repe had previously brought. So that's what is happening. Now I'll have Cindy hop onto the legislature website so we can see what we're looking at here. There's a lot going on the bills page, but there's a section I want to show you that'll kind of help work through what that process looks like. So if you're on your homepage, top right, you'll see you can search bills. So Cindy will put in 574 there. Oh, these numbers, they're always burned into your brain until next session, and you have to learn new ones.
Right.
So this is the bill's homepage, as you can see. The first thing I want to point out is right there at the top where it says Hansen Amendment, and it has the numbers. If you click on those, that is the new language. So when we talk about adding an amendment or that type of thing, think about it in terms of they're basically going back to vote this document forward. That's what they're wanting to do. So this document includes both the anti-trans care bill and the abortion ban bill. Just very briefly, because there's lots of nuance and we're talking about process, but the biggest things to highlight here is that for the abortion ban, it's pushing the time back to 12 weeks from 6 weeks, which still is not what the medical community would advise. It it has removed some of the safeguards, particularly around fetal anomaly, and it has become even more vague about penalties for doctors. And there are ways that it can be read that would make doctors criminally liable. So those are the big pieces to know. And Cindy, you're probably more familiar with the 574. Do you want to give the highlight of how this is different, if it is?
It is different than the bill originally brought by Senator Kauth, which, just to remind everybody, 574, which is called the Let Them Grow Act, is to ban healthcare specifically for transgender youth. It is not going to ban the specific healthcare that we're all talking about for cisgender youth, though. So this is based in discrimination. And it's really unfortunate because all of the major medical associations and professionals in our state are telling us this is not good legislation. And I really think it's important to remind everybody that all of the health care that is discussed in LB574 has always been, and it would continue going forward, it's always been with parental consent. And generally, this healthcare includes things like therapy and the kind of medical procedures that they start talking about, including hormone blockers and puberty blockers and hormone therapy. Those types of things are available only after quite extensive work with doctors and parental consent. And then, everyone keeps talking about surgery. It is exceedingly rare that any sort of surgery be involved with minors regarding gender affirming care for transgender youth. And Senator Jacobson said that he talked with someone at UNMC or the Med Center or somewhere here in the state to find out that he thought it was like 3 surgeries per year, which would be breast surgery. They call it top surgery. And of course, that particular healthcare is available to Nebraska children who are cisgender at this point for, say, teenage girls who might have breast reduction surgery for various reasons, sports, health, posture, gender affirming, as well as, say, augmentation, or boys actually go through breast reduction surgery for gynecomastia, is I think how you pronounce it, where sometimes boys would just have excess tissue that would be handled that way. So it is exceedingly rare, and it is something that I just wanted to kind of let everyone know what we're talking about. The first bill that Senator Kauth brought would ban all of that healthcare and not let parents and these children work with their doctors and access the care that what they believe would be best for these children. And now this amendment is supposedly only banning surgery treatment for transgender youth. It would not impact cisgender youth. And then there's an added procedure that would go through some sort of bureaucracy at the Department of Health and Human Services with the state of Nebraska, with the chief medical officer instituting some sort of policies that doctors and parents would have to go through to access these puberty blockers or hormones, if that's what was indicated for these children. Again, that would always be available for cisgender children. This ban is only, and this seems like this procedure would only be for transgender children. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what we're talking about with that.
Thank you. That's so helpful to give that. That was a really good summary because it's a very complicated issue. So I appreciate that. And I think reiterating your point that all the large medical groups that are professional practicing groups are in opposition because it's not best practice. So If you want to hop on and look at the bill, you can. Just a quick reminder, everything underlined is the new content. So you don't have to read all of the other stuff. It's just the new content in those underlined sections. So I think, Cindy, let's go back to if we can go back to the bill's homepage. This will be a good jumping off point to talk about the process. Okay, so like we talked about, whenever this comes to the floor, which we don't know when, but there's less than 20 days in the session, so soonish, what will happen is that the bill will be announced on final read. At that point, there will be a motion made, most likely to recommit to select for a specific amendment. Once that starts, the clock starts on the filibuster. Final read filibuster is 2 hours as opposed to the 4 on select or the 8 on general. So 2 hours of filibuster time. Now, as a reminder, what the filibuster does in our Nebraska legislature is it basically ups the ante of how many votes you need to move forward. So if they introduced it, there was no filibuster, there would only need 25 votes to move something.
A simple majority.
A simple majority, yes. Thank you. I always think in terms of numbers, like they're like 3/5, and I'm like calculating it on my iPhone.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of how many votes. So a simple majority. What filibustering does is if you can sustain that for long enough, it's basically saying there's enough pushback. We need to hit a higher level of people who want to move forward on this conversation. So it moves it to 33. Folks would need 33 votes to move to the next step in the process. So that's
what they call invoking cloture.
Yes, it's what's called invoking
cease debate.
To cease debate, exactly. So when that happens, I'm gonna over on the I don't know what side I'm like turned around here. You'll see the priority section over there. The not the main section, but over to the side, it lists the different motions that are currently on the bill. So you'll see there's still a lot amendments, motions that have been put to legitimately recommit it to different places, motions that have been put just to buy time for that filibuster. So when the clock starts, the way we go about this is that, in theory, we'll start by debating that whether we should move it back to select or not. The next thing that comes up on the bill is what's debated. So that's the amendment. And here's where it gets a little tricky, because the thought is that there might be some people who would support 574 who aren't all on board for 620 or the version of it, and vice versa. So basically, if they can manage to get them together, they might be able to get to that 33 number that they need. This is why the process matters so much, because if the filibuster's held for 2 hours, the vote goes to what they are voting on currently, which makes it needing to have cloture on whether they should send it back to select. They haven't added the amendment yet, which would then force them to vote on the bill without the amendment. So, or vote to send it back, but it's without that amendment, the cloture point. So that's why the cloture point is so important. And that's where we really need to be encouraging our senators to vote against that. Sometimes we see our senators say things like, well, I didn't vote for the bill, I just voted for cloture. At this point in the game, that's voting for the bill. So we need people to we need to not get to 33 to not get this moved forward. And that can look like either a no vote or a present not voting. It's how many you get, not the percentage. So they need to get to 33. And if there's one person who's, the 33rd is present not voting, they're at 32, they're done with the bill for now. So that's the process that we're talking about. If for some reason cloture is met, then what happens is the bill, they need 25 votes to send it back to select file. There'd be another two, hold on.
4.
Too many steps here.
Yeah.
So then there would be another round of debate. Or no, that's on final, isn't it?
There would be another round at select, so there'd be 4 hours.
Thank you. So then there would be that 4 hours. if they add the amendment, they would vote on the amendment and then vote if they can get to it, and then vote on the broader bill. And then
I actually think,
go ahead.
I'm so sorry, I don't want to interrupt,
No,
but I think moving it back to select only happens with a specific amendment. That's the only way to do it. So it means it will be with this
so
amendment.
It automatically puts the amendment on that. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you for that clarification. All the little nuances. At any rate, they'll need 25 again to move it to final again, to vote on it again. And as you can see, there's lots of different votes that happen. So it might be enticing to be like, we got another vote, we got another vote. Remember, once that cloture number has been hit, the number needed to move the bill forward drops to 25. So that first vote is where we need to have our folks vote what they really feel like we should be doing with this bill.
And then when it's back on select, we could go to cloture again.
Correct.
And, so let's just encourage our senators to please quash this now. Yeah. It's not good policy in any way, shape, or form on either bill. And to combine them like this is, I don't know what the right word is, Rachel. I'm shocked and angry that this has been done this way. The thing I keep coming back to is that as members of the second house, it's our right and our responsibility to help the senators to come up with the best legislation for our state. And the unicameral, on too many occasions this session, have been restricting our ability to do that as the second house. And it actually happened with both hearings on LB574 and LB626. They were held in the Health and Human Services Committee, and Chairperson Hansen limited testimony to a total of 3 hours for proponents, 3 hours for opponents. And it didn't matter how many Nebraskans showed up to testify. And do you mind if I talk a little bit about this?
Share your number. And while I want to put because this is great, because I want to put some context around this. What Cindy's sharing demonstrates how much we at this point need to communicate with them, because if you're not sitting on the committee, you're just trusting what the senator is telling you or the committee statement you're looking at. And Cindy's going to give us some numbers here that demonstrate what they're seeing versus what actually happened, which again is why we need to be communicating with them, because they're in that bubble. They're in that bubble of the Capitol.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm looking at the minority statement for 574, which, again, everything is unprecedented this session. Normally, a committee statement is pretty straightforward, and the committee gets together and they vote to either advance a bill or not. And this time, the senators on the committee did not all agree on how it should be advanced. So the minority senators, Kavanaugh, Day, and Walz, put together a statement, and this lists all the people who testified in support. And on 574, that was 57 people, and in those 3 hours. And then on the opponent side, there were 42 people who testified in opposition. And then they went to neutral. And I don't think there were any neutral on this bill. Unfortunately, that 3 hour cutoff, that arbitrary cutoff, turned away 191 Nebraskans who were there to testify. So their voices were not heard on this legislation. And it's, all here on this, their names are actually here.
Cindy, can you clarify which bill is the 626 or 574?
574.
574. Perfect.
And then if
we problem on 626, so we have to clarify which one.
Yes. So 626, and I'm going to switch to that right now on the screen. There's a minority statement for that particular bill as well. And the minority statement here listing all of the proponent testimony, that's the people support it in person. That was 660 proponents testified within those 3 hours. And then they cut off and, said, okay, we're done talking with proponents. And now we're going to have opponents. And there were I'm so sorry. 60 proponents testified, and then 39 opponents testified. And I think it was a smaller number in those 33 hours because of more questions. There was a lot of doctors that came to testify and say why this is not good for their health care in our state. And so there were 39 opponents that testified, and I think just maybe 1 or 2 neutral. And then the shocking thing is that the number of people that were turned away to testify on 626, there were 74 proponents that were turned away and not allowed to speak. And then as far as the number, I'm flipping, there's 14 pages total to this minority statement, right? I'm flipping through. There were 268 opponents that were turned away and not allowed to testify on this bill. And then I see here there were 7 neutral. And it was, really similar ratios when Chairperson Hansen was talking about the people who sent in online comments for the official record. And I have those written somewhere, but really, I think there was like 900 opposition and maybe 500 in support of the bill. So a lot of people tried to let the senators know that they opposed this, but our voices weren't heard. Mm-hmm. And it just really is upsetting to me that we would not be having a new hearing on this bill, since it is a new bill mm-hmm. that Senator Hansen is basically creating. And if we were taking our time and being careful and making sure that we were involving the second house with this process, I believe that it would be good and right for a hearing to be held. Of course, it would be a 7-day notice, and we would not restrict testimony based arbitrarily on time, because people, like in the other hearings, came from all over. People drove to get to the Capitol. They got babysitters and daycare and left work, found someone to fill in for them. Maybe they didn't go to school that day or missed class. And we really should have heard everybody and their stories and their concerns about this legislation, how it impacts their lives and their livelihoods, especially like when we're talking about the medical community. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about 626, it affects people's lives, of course, regarding their reproductive. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. Thanks.
Yeah, and actually, Cindy, you hit on a really good point, because I get some the frequently asked questions about where we're at in the process with this. And that's one of them. One of them is well, shouldn't we have a hearing on this? Because this is a new bill. Hasn't been heard before. Where this comes from is that in our state constitution, it says that each bill shall have one subject. So we have one subject, and it should be clearly in the title, which is why some of the titles are really, really long. But that's where that comes from. Now, the pushback, the argument that I think will hold in this regard is folks who say, well, technically you did have a hearing on an abortion bill and on a gender affirming care bill, so we don't really need a new one because we're just taking those and putting them together. I would argue that there's some significant differences in these bills, and being put together is a whole nother piece. But I think that's a fight we'll probably lose on this round. So that's where that context comes from. Another question I get all the time is this legal? And it's hard to answer that question because, again, it's in our Constitution that it's a one subject bill situation. And you'll sometimes hear the word germane or germaneness, which is a legal term that means it has to be similar or related. You can't just put random things together and pass it as a bill. However, this session, we're doing that with a lot of things. So there's been some questionable, this is all sort of related to insurance, and it's totally disparate things. So they're continuing that, but with this is much more starkly different. So in the question of, is that legal? It's potentially unconstitutional, and therefore open to a lawsuit, in addition to the many other ways that these bills might be open to lawsuits. For example, the blatant discrimination piece that Cindy mentioned. So those are two of the big questions that we get. The third is, is there any hope here? Like, have they already, is this already a done deal? And I do think there's hope. And I think that it's going to take people like us communicating and again saying, even beyond the content of the bill, the way this process has gone has not been fair to the public. The public hasn't been heard. That hasn't been reflected in what gets communicated on the floor. And due to what we've always worked off of, precedent, once a bill is dead for a session, a bill is dead for the session. In fact, Speaker Arch, after 626, because all of us were kind of holding our breath like, is this real? Like, is this coming back somehow? And he very explicitly and very publicly said, LB626 is not coming back. This is a loophole because it's not the exact same bill. That's a loophole. They're bringing back the same bill. So reiterating that this is not how this process works, and we're purposely cutting out the public, purposely ignoring Nebraskans' voices. It's just unprecedented. It really is the only word I can think of. So, Cindy, are there those are kind of the most frequently asked questions I get. Are there ones that you get asked or you're curious about?
Well, I think a lot of people were just really wondering, how does this work? It's already, 574 was on the last stage. Now they have to send it back to the second stage. And then how does that work? We really just want to ask our senators to stop this bill. We need to move on. They have so many other priorities that they should be focusing on for our communities, for our economy, for our other priorities for our businesses or families. And I think that we are going to need to be in contact with all of our senators. I'm putting across the bottom of the screen how you can get in touch with your personal senator. But at this point, when it's on the floor of the legislature, talk to all of them. And there are a few senators who are kind of key that we hear a lot, mentioned, to reach specifically out to some that might have, like flexibility. They might be possible votes to stop this and to make sure and shore up, and thank the senators who've been working so hard to this point. I don't know if you wanted to talk about any of them. I just feel like we need everybody to talk with everybody and ask them to call, email, send a letter, show up in person. You can go to the Capitol and just be there and get in the hallways, catching senators when they're, going back and forth to their offices, or you can go in the rotunda and request to speak to a senator and ask them to come off the floor and talk to them that way. You can go to the gallery and you can just observe the legislature as it's conducting, as they're conducting their business. Mm-hmm. And I think that scrutiny and oversight and interaction and involvement with our senators is really crucial right now.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And I agree with your contact everyone at this point. There's plenty of attempted vote counting going on, but I honestly think that every senator at this point is worth communicating with about this. You never know what individual conversation is going to move someone. I really want to reiterate something that you said that was wonderful, which is please, please, please reach out to the folks who have been champions for this, the folks who have voted against this, the folks who have voted, present not voting, with your encouragement and your thanks. It's the amount of pressure on them is unbelievable. So knowing that what they're doing is supported is equally as important as telling someone who opposes the bill that you don't support it. So I would definitely encourage that piece of it as well, is to reach out to those champions and let them know. And the other thing about, you were asking specific senators, you can, if you just want the lay of the land, to go back in that on that bill homepage. We don't need to go to it, but there's a section that has all of the votes and you can see how every senator has voted. And that might be good to check that first and say, hey, I see you did this or you did this, and then let them know. Finally, I would just reiterate, these senators are getting all sorts of things. Some of them are from Nebraskans. Some of them are from outside sources. Some of them are nefarious. Some of them are good intentioned, but they are getting yelled at a lot. So even if you disagree with the senator, please keep that in mind, that they are a person. They are a person with a family on the other side. And also, if you're yelling, your point gets lost. There is a time and a place for yelling, and I will be there with my sign. The email about this particular vote is not the time for yelling. So be firm, but be polite.
Yeah, that it is. It's so important that we really try to help them hear us. And this whole process is on a dime, right? We don't know from day to day on the agenda what is going to come up the next day, when this bill is going to be on the floor, when we need to activate. So follow the League of Women Voters, follow Rachel, follow the Nebraska Legislative Study Group. We will try to keep everyone up to date and share resources from, like the ACLU and the Women's Fund and IB Black Girl, Planned Parenthood, all these various organizations, and help each other to learn. And I am going to put a plug, just one, that everyone please be mindful that the legislature in the next election will be up for every odd numbered district. So it is so important to make sure that you're keeping in mind who's going to run to represent you in your odd numbered districts this next election, and hopefully we can get some good people.
Cindy, can I add one last thing as we're kind of wrapping up here? So as you said, we don't know what's going to happen. We really don't. You don't know till the vote happens, what conversations have been had, what's moved someone. Even if these bills do pass, there are things we can do. We are not powerless. There are legal routes we can take. There are other civic routes we can take. There's another session. The sun will rise the next day, and it'll be really hard for some people, but we have options, and we need to be here to support one another in that. So even if this bill passes against the will of what we see seems to be the majority of Nebraskans, we can still use our voice. So don't give up hope on that one.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah.
And we'll probably see you at the legislature in the next few days. And I really hope you have a good evening. Thanks so much.
You too.